Guten gardening, everybody. Well, I'm super excited for today's video. You know, a lot of times we have conversations about the nutritional value of vegetables, especially those organic garden fresh vegetables, and we know of course that these vegetables are healthy, are good for us. And a lot of times when we talk about the nutritional value of vegetables or why they're so good for us, we don't take into consideration the fact that most of the vegetables we grow here are considered to be low on the glycemic index and glycemic load. And a lot of times we throw terms out like glycemic index or glycemic load, and we don't even really talk about what they mean. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that piece, the definition of terms today, and then I'm going to give you our top 12 vegetables that are low on both the glycemic index and glycemic load. And I've ranked them not just based on their being low on both of those scales, but also based on their nutritional value. And again, this is all a matter of averages. And you should know that based on maturity of the vegetable, based on the preparation, these numbers can change some, but this is just a given average. And I looked at multiple sources. I'll put those in the description as well, so you can see where we got our information from for this video. All right, I'm going to try to provide a couple of simple definitions for our terminology today. My understanding of the glycemic index is that it's a simple measurement of the speed with which carbohydrate-containing food raises your blood sugar. So a food that's high on the glycemic index is going to be problematic or potentially problematic if you're somebody who is at risk of or suffers from diabetes, if you're trying to maintain your weight. Those foods process through your system faster, the carbohydrates break down faster, which causes spikes in your blood sugar. And this can be problematic over time. Whereas a food that is low on the glycemic index is going to be one that breaks down or digests more slowly and therefore has less negative impact. So the glycemic index measures the amount of carbs in a food and then what it does or the impact it has on your blood sugar levels. And the way that they do that research is, and the research that I did says, the way they do that research is they'll do a comparison. They'll give you a specific amount of a type of food. They'll measure your blood sugar levels for a period of time afterward, and then they'll do the same amount of, say, straight sugar or white bread, and they'll do a measurement or compare the measurements of blood sugar in those same individuals over a period of time. And that comparison is where that index comes from, where the result on the scale of the glycemic index comes from. Well, if you think about it for a little bit, you can probably see some of the issues that rise from the glycemic index as a good measurement of whether or not you should eat certain fruits, vegetables, foods, etc. And that is that we don't eat the same amount. A serving of apple, a serving of spinach, etc. It's not the same as a serving of bread. And so they've come up with the glycemic load, which is, I think, a little bit more effective in looking at the value or the harm, perhaps you could say, of any given food for a person who's really conscious about their blood sugar levels. And what the glycemic load does is to take into account both the quantity and the quality of the carbohydrates by looking at a specific average serving. And so of course the scales have different values. If we're just looking at the glycemic index, low on the glycemic index is 0 to 55. A food that's on the moderate side of the glycemic index is 55 to 69, and then anything that's above 70 is considered to be high on the glycemic index. But if we're looking at glycemic load, then those values are going to be lower in terms of what we're looking for low, moderate, and high. Low on the glycemic load is 10 and under. Medium on the glycemic load is 11 to 19, and then 20 and higher is considered to be high on the glycemic load. And if I were really paying attention to my blood sugar level, I think that the glycemic load would make the most sense. By the way, I'm going to put the formula for calculation of glycemic load on the screen right now so you can see how it's calculated. I'm not necessarily a math person, but the difference between these two definitely makes sense to me. Well, I think I certainly said a lot there. There's a lot of background or description. I hope all that made sense. Again, this is something that I've been researching of late, spent quite a bit of time researching. There's some really valuable tools out there, some really valuable websites to provide averages, but I do need to stress this, that again, there is no one determined number for either GI or GL for the glycemic index or the glycemic load, because again, things can vary a lot, but there are averages, and that's what we're looking at for these 12 vegetables that we wanted to talk about that are definitely low on both of those scales. So I'm going to actually rank these backwards from 12 to 1, and then I'll throw a couple of other ones in there that we didn't put on the list but certainly could have been. And if you have a vegetable that you love that's low in the glycemic index or glycemic load, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. Let us know. And if there's something we missed that should never have been left off this list, you can let us know that as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that backwards countdown with number 12, which is celery. And I'll tell you this, celery is one of those vegetables that I notice one of the biggest differences, it's like right up there with tomatoes, biggest differences between homegrown and store-bought. That homegrown celery has a vastly stronger taste, in my opinion, than anything you buy at the store. It also happens to be my younger daughter's favorite vegetable, at least as of right now. Celery comes in at about an average of 15 on the glycemic index, so very low. And in terms of glycemic load, it is a 0.3, which is incredibly low in the glycemic load, and is something that I think a lot of people could find easy to grow. We've got some celery that came back for its second year. I was really surprised, even here in our Zone 5 garden. Now keep in mind that any numbers that I give you today are averages, and we've looked across different websites. We've seen some variance in numbers, but most of them are pretty close to these. So that's our number 12. At number 11, we have eggplant. Now eggplant's really interesting to me because not only is it a vegetable that has anthocyanins, and if you don't know what those are, you should do a little bit of research, but we've talked about those in previous videos as well. It's actually a little bit higher on the glycemic index than celery, with an average of about 20, but that's still considered to be quite low in the glycemic index. And as far as glycemic load goes, you're looking at about a 1.7, which is well below the 10 that constitutes something as being low on the glycemic load. And eggplant is one of those amazing producers. Once you get it going, you're going to have a ton of that vegetable. I could add that it tastes fantastic as well. Now, number 10 on our list is lettuce, and you're going to hear a lot of common numbers with a lot of these vegetables. Lettuce comes in at a 15 on the glycemic index and a 0.5 on glycemic load, and it grows so quickly. It's one of those vegetables that you could have cut and come again, keep growing for an entire season, basically, as long as it doesn't get too hot out there and it bolts, and you could end up with, within about 4 to 5 weeks, getting the beginnings of your lettuce harvests. And I tell you what, going out to your garden and harvesting a beautiful crisp salad, I don't know if there's anything quite like that. Number 9 on our list is white cabbage. Now, depending on the variety of cabbage, you may see a slight variance in terms of the scale here on the index or the load, but for the white cabbage, we're looking at an average of about 15 on the index and 0.9 on the glycemic load. And I was thinking about this the other day. If I had to compare cabbage versus lettuce in terms of which one I preferred the taste of, well, there's a reason, or another reason I should say, why cabbage is slightly higher on the list. How about you? What's your preference, cabbage or lettuce? Number 8 on our list is zucchini. And actually what I'm going to say is zucchini and squash, or summer squash, seem to be pretty comparable. Our research shows that they both have an average of about a 15 on the glycemic index and somewhere between a 0.5 and a 0.7 on the glycemic load. And you know, we've grown them so often, and they're the ones that people give away so much. I know that, but they get massive. You end up with a ton of really good, really healthy food. Now remember, as we're listing these off in reverse order, one of the things that we try to do is to look at the average nutritional value. And so that number 1 is going to be one that's both low on the glycemic index and glycemic load, and also has a ton of nutrient content, nutrient density. But all of these vegetables are somewhere along those lines. They all have some really good nutrient potential. At number 7, we have cauliflower. And cauliflower also has a value of about 15 on the index and 0.8 on the glycemic load. And it's interesting, I think cauliflower is one of the harder vegetables that we have on this list to grow and to keep nice. I'll say that cauliflower is one of those where you have to make sure that you're covering up the head of the cauliflower prior to harvesting it so that it doesn't get bleached or other kind of damage from the sun. But in the end, the value, the low glycemic index and load values and the nutritional value make it well worth it. Now, most of the vegetables that I have on this list are ones that I think people often eat by themselves, and this one they do as well, but I would say that this is a vegetable that a lot of people add. This next one on the list is one that a lot of people add to other foods in order to consume it, and that is our sweet peppers. Our sweet peppers have an average glycemic index value of 15 and a glycemic load of 1. And the way I would think about it with sweet peppers is that means it's a really good vegetable to add into dishes to cook with that isn't going to really create a problem for your blood sugar levels. One of the other nice things about sweet peppers is that you can basically treat them like a perennial depending on how you care for them. And up next on our list, number 5 is a perennial, and that is asparagus. Asparagus comes in at about a 15 on the index and a 0.6 on the glycemic load. And while this one requires probably the most patience in terms of the amount of time to get it going, because it takes a couple years to really get good asparagus, once the plant is established, it's going to be one of your earliest producing vegetables in the spring, and the taste is superb. Raw or cooked, it's absolutely outstanding. Coming in at number 4 with a glycemic index of about 15 and a glycemic load of about 1.1, we've got Brussels sprouts. Now, Brussels sprouts have been a vegetable that's taught us some patience because there have been times where we haven't really gotten the size of sprouts that we would like. But from my point of view, this is a brassica that's well worth the effort. We had a couple years ago where we were harvesting some of those Brussels sprouts with snow on top of them, but the taste was superb. This is an excellent addition to your low glycemic diet. Coming in at number 3 on our list with a glycemic index of about 15 and a glycemic load of about 0.5 is broccoli. Now, broccoli is something that I think our family, it's a vegetable that I think our family eats more than just about anybody else. And if I'm being perfectly honest, we haven't grown enough broccoli in the past, and we've actually had to. This is one of the few vegetables that we've had to buy to compensate for that fact. But broccoli is exceptional raw. I don't know about you, I prefer it raw, but I'll also eat it steamed. It doesn't really matter to me. The one thing I don't do is I don't add any cheese to my broccoli. Let me know if that's a hot take right there. But anyway, broccoli is another great vegetable that's on that low glycemic index and load, and a great addition to your diet. And at this point, while the vegetables we've been talking about have all been healthy for you, we're getting into that top 3 range where it comes to low glycemic index and load, but also exceptionally healthy. And you'll see that with our top 2 as well. You know, one of the things that's been fun about making this video is I'm moving all throughout the garden. So you're getting some sneak peeks. If you've never really followed our channel before, you're seeing some sneak peeks of some of the areas in our garden ahead of other people. Well, number 2 on our list, probably the vegetable that is the hardiest or longest lasting for us, an incredibly nutritious vegetable, and that is kale. And kale comes in at about a 15 on the glycemic index and a 0.3 for glycemic load. And kale is so incredibly versatile. And I know some people take kale and say that it's, you know, overdone, but realistically, with the nutritional content, with the fact that it's low in the glycemic index, and the fact that we here in Zone 5 have been able to keep our kale going for 5, 6, 7, 8 months at a time, it's well worth growing and certainly well worth adding to your diet. And number 1 on our list, and there's a very clear reason why this is number 1 on our list, the taste is phenomenal. The glycemic index value is about 15 with the glycemic load at about 0.3. Again, the nutritional value off the charts. Oftentimes this is considered to be one of the most nutritious vegetables, especially fresh. It's coming in right here in our green stalk, and that is our beautiful spinach. Now, one of the things I should point out, you're hearing a lot of these leafy greens at the top of our list. We're not talking about vegetables in terms of oxalates. That could be a different video altogether. But in terms of the glycemic index and load, spinach is right up there for us. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video. I want to make this again clear one more time so I don't get anybody telling me these numbers aren't precise or there should be a different order to this. Part of this is based on the overall nutritional value. Part of it's based on our research into that glycemic index and glycemic load, acknowledging the fact that depending on preparation, maturity of plant, etc., you could see some differences in those numbers. But it is important to remember when it comes to any of these things that a majority of our vegetables should be considered low glycemic. But if you're worried about whether or not a vegetable you want to eat is, you can look that up. Now, one of the things that I will tell you, there's a vegetable or two that didn't make this list, and in particular I'm talking about potatoes. Now, there are definitely some varieties of potatoes that are lower on the glycemic index chart, but that's not a vegetable that's going to make this list, unfortunately. But there are some other vegetables that could have made our list here, including squash. You're a good summer squash out there. Kohlrabi, one of our favorite vegetables. Leeks, which we're growing and we overwintered this season. Radishes, which we also have growing already in green stalks and in our raised beds. And even cucumbers. But I'll say this about cucumbers, as delicious as they are, and I love a good cucumber, we'll be growing them again this year. Nutritionally, well, there's a reason they're not on this list. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed that video and found it useful. A ton of vegetables out there that could be on this list. And again, if you have another one that you would recommend or that you think should be on this list or is a personal favorite of yours, please let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video and found it useful and informative, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.